For those who haven't met me, my name is James Dellenger. I'm the Executive Director of Green Watch and Education Watch at Capital Research Center in Washington, D.C. I've been at CRC for about a year now as of this month. I've been working on a variety of issues, but at CRC we fundamentally are focused on the niche of philanthropy and nonprofits and their role in political advocacy. We've been doing this for probably about 22 years now, and some things don't change, and it's, sometimes it's depressing, as John talking about, and sometimes it's a little more interesting, because I'm going to talk a little bit about how those concentrated interests get some of their money during the dry spells when we think it's dead, but they come back and they come back and they come back. Well, we're going to talk about the nexus of independent wealth from foundations that hold these emotional, religious beliefs very close to themselves. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself and about the article that's before you and some of our stuff that you're receiving. My article, let's see here, I started months and months and months ago. I'd say I saw the article, or advertisement for this conference in Heartland Institute's Environmental News. And I said, oh, that's great. We should definitely do something. All the environmental groups that we follow, this is part of the litany. Smart growth is just been etched right into the, are you green, are you this? Well, if you are, you have to believe in smart growth, you have to believe in growth management, and light rail, and hop on board. With the groups, though, I realized, hey, we've done this before, and I found a paper that had been done in '99. But I realized, a lot of things changed in 7 years, so maybe it's time to plow this one again. My article is originally intended for our Foundation Watch format, which is usually focused on the foundations and what their role is. But unfortunately, Warren Buffett decided to give $37 billion away. And one of our editors is trying to track down who the groups are that are going to get the benefits of those $6 billion that folks aren't talking about, that Bill Gates is not getting. Some of them aren't so good groups, but depending on your definition of a good group. Okay, let's see here. Let me define some of my credibility to speak on these issues, as I am probably one of the younger people in this room, and all weekend.
Don't throw in our face like that.
Yeah. Okay, youngest. Let's see here. I was born in Atlanta, and I was born in Atlanta in a time, and I have diffused interests as well. Just to give you a little background. My grandmother's actually on the board of the Georgia Nature Conservancy. Let's see here. My grandfather on my mother's side was a lifer at Norfolk Southern Railway, and some other interests in my family are involved in various sort of business interests that would or would not be interested. But then I talked to my stepfather this weekend, who's in commercial finance, and thought I was weird that I was going to come and talk about traffic for an entire weekend. Let's see here. When I moved to what was the suburbs when I was 5, my father died when I was young. There was probably about 5,000 people in my hometown, which is right up 400. Everyone talks about 400, and well, now all the traffic's up there. Yep, it's all up there. I grew up in a little town called Roswell. It was probably about 5,000 people. Now it's over probably 75,000, I think. So in my 18 years of being there, I saw a lot of what a lot of people term sprawl, and some people call it sprawl. I just call it home. It didn't bother me when I was growing up during it, and it doesn't bother me now. And they're still building, and the density keeps getting higher and higher. But some of the ideas behind smart growth from the homeowner perspective have been winning in the recent years. I can recall a city council election where it was someone who was more pro-development, pro-increased taxes through more business, and someone who was running on a straight smart growth sort of ticket. And I asked my parents why they were voting for the smart growth person, because they're generally pretty open, pro-change, market-based. And I said, well, the other guy's actually kind of, he has some ethical issues that we are concerned about. So I said, oh, okay, that makes sense. But otherwise, they were part of the property rights type folks who look at smart growth as a way to boost their own property value. And that sort of idea struck me really negatively as kind of chopping down at that ladder of opportunity where, as the Forrest Gump, seat taken, if there's no more room, then how are people supposed to come up in the world when they're supposed to do the things that are right? If you're working hard, there shouldn't be certain impediments in your way to do the normal sort of things, whether it's buying a house and being able to settle down and have a family before the age of 45. If you live up in the north where there's much, much more growth restrictions, that's much harder. And there are political consequences to these, but a lot of political scientists are only now starting to see what the consequences of being able to start a family much later in life is having on the American political perspective. But getting back to me in Georgia, let's see here. Roswell now has over 79,000 people and 30,000 households, which mostly is 21,000 families. Population density was about 805 people per square kilometer, and everyone's favorite David Cross likes to say it's the whitest place on earth. That's changed in probably the last 10 years as there's been large migrations of lots of Hispanic folks and a good number of upwardly mobile African American folks as well. However, it's still pretty white. Let's see here. Some folks do live there. There's a little glitterati, not much. Jeff Foxworthy kind of stops in at when I was in high school a few times at the local PetSmart as my first high school job. That was kind of interesting. Chipper Jones, famous baseball player, yeah. But let me get down to the fun stuff. The fun stuff is the groups and the foundations that fund them, and that keep them going when no one else really cares about their issues. Philanthropy is an interesting subject, and I kind of got into it from a hands-on experience. After I graduated from George Washington University, I did what most people are told to do if you want to do the DC thing. You have to go work on the Hill for a summer. So I worked on the Hill for a summer, and no one told me the second part of that. There is no employment after you have an internship on the Hill for the summer. It just doesn't exist. So I was trying to figure out what I want to do with myself, and I had the ability and the opportunity to start working with older folks and teaching computer skills and taking surplus computer goods and moving them into senior centers and other sort of senior facilities. And long and short of the story was, I was one of these people who said, we can come in, we can be more efficient, we'll teach all these classes. Well, people didn't like that because there's a lot of make work that I was unaware of that goes on. It wasn't about helping people. It was about, well, we can't send old Johnny out, I don't care if he just opens up the computer and shows people what's inside. You might have a great skill, but we're not interested. So I kind of got frustrated, and that kind of pushed me more back into the idea side. And since I got to CRC, I've really enjoyed what we do, and we do a lot of different work on, we aren't as Adrian said, we're more of a research side. And we go in through all the tax forms and all the laborious stuff that a lot of people wouldn't want to do. And we take diffused knowledge and focus it. And then we publish them in our publications as to what's been going on and the different movements. I definitely sent you guys out. There was a handout that said the largest smart growth grants. Granted, just, there's a little asterisk there. They were self-described within the search software that I was using. These aren't, all of them. I just wanted to have a little sample so folks could say it was everything from public policy to actual campaigns. Say, oh, wow, that's interesting. But if you turn back into the paper that's actually being published next month called Smart Growth and Suburbia, actually you'll see that there's a lot of foundations involved. And these foundations have a lot of different interests. And part of the problem is, as I was saying before, the smart growth, gotta love, light rail mentality is ingrained in the elite world of foundations and high nonprofits. I mean, they have no accountability to anyone, really. I mean, the only accountability they have is for people to call them out and call their ideas out, but they have the ability to fund it year after year after year, no matter whether you want it. I mean, they have whole categories of environmental justice, social justice, philanthropy, where the entire purpose of it is to change the way normal people are supposed to live on a regular basis and work towards that and fund those who are most effective at that. But sometimes it just happens to be people they're friends with. The problem is, as far as any movement goes, and I think this is one of their bigger weaknesses, and they've had a lot of, the left in general has gotten a lot of criticism for people on the further left, I would say, the more unreformed, more structural Marxist, who say, look, at least the right in general has a grassroots element to it. Heritage has 200,000 donors. Some of these pro-life groups have 40,000 donors. You don't. You have all of these different foundations, all of these different nonprofits, but you're still reliant on a very few small amount of very wealthy people who agree with your ideas. And generally speaking, they are folks of inherited wealth who have no idea how that money was procured and have a romantic notion of egalitarianism, a very extreme egalitarianism. And it's been popular within the last 30 years for them to also have a strong political environmentalism attached to it, and emotional environmentalism. And as John was talking about earlier, the rational versus the emotional, the problem is they always push their issues on the emotional and not the rational. It doesn't matter if it makes sense. It emotionally feels good. And if it feels good, then they're gonna do it. I'm not gonna go too far into detail with my paper because I'd say the first half of it or so is dedicated to everything that we've discussed already, and I don't want to just sit here and gloss over it. Basically, my editor was kind of upset at me because I kind of, as he called it, I notebook dumped him, because I had so many different ideas and so many different ways to go because it's such a broad and dense topic. And he said, well, we got to break this down. So I said, okay, we have to show what smart growth is and then blame somebody for its negative impacts. So if you go a little bit further back, you can see where it starts, Hollywood activists and conservatives. An element that's really started to scare me lately are these folks that are, after Rod Dreyer's Crunchy Cons came out, are now self-described Crunchy Cons, and they have something to call themselves. And they, have a very strong, small is beautiful sort of mentality about everything. And the problem is that this is a conservatism that it is very culturally conservative, but on economic terms, it basically decouples anything from a rational market sort of thinking, and it's basically 12th century folk economics. And it feels good, you can't tear something down because we're conserving it. And part of what I wanted to get to in that was the change in, some of it's been mentioned, but not really. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has become a lead element in preservation, or fighting sprawl and doing all these campaigns that they like to do, but in the name of a different subject. Well, we're not really, we're not against sprawl, but we're just preserving. Well, you can't do that. We have to preserve this. Unfortunately, that comes to the point of protecting the entire state of Vermont from a Walmart that might pop up somewhere. I mean, you've got a lot of cow acreage. Can't you put a Walmart somewhere? Let's see here. If you look towards the back of the paper, you see a pretty enormous list. And basically, I really wanted to get, it's called the Funders Network on Smart Growth. And they are basically the financial vanguard. Granted, not all of the folks who are involved there, and not all of those numbers you see are going toward smart growth campaigns. But I wanted you to take a look at it just to see what is their base that they're donating from, and how much have they given in the given year. So whether it's from 99, basically the numbers go from anywhere from 1999 to 2005. And it's just how much money they're investing in their ideas. And the nexus between the world of these elite funders and the people who are engaged in the campaigns, whether it's direct, if it's not nonprofit political advocacy and also nonprofit political advocacy, is very close and very tight. And so my point of showing how much money some of these groups or some of these foundations are granting is just to say, look, if you're giving out that much money, eventually people are going to take your ideas seriously, or if they call you, you're going to show up and be involved in something else that might not necessarily be your cup of tea, but if you're getting a $100,000 grant from them, well, you still might show up. And it's just that, you've got some influence. And these aren't small groups, and some of them aren't, big groups, but they are diffused and they're all over the country. And some of them are just community foundations, which get money from normal people, and community foundations aren't inherently evil or bad or, spend a significant percentage on smart growth issues. But at the same time, it's slowly crept into the litany and the rhetoric of the goals that they're trying to promote. And part of this that I think has been untalked about, that I want to talk about a little bit, is Trust for Public Land and some of the other land preservation groups. And it's kind of tricky because, it's like the whole idea of who doesn't want a nice environment, right? I mean, it's kind of, everyone wants a nice environment. It's just how you get there is the question. Do you have to listen to Greenpeace? Do you have to listen to NRDC? The problem is that people like Trust for Public Land, they use their money purely to advocate for local governments, basically to spend taxpayer money based on bonds or whatever they're going to do to buy up land. And this isn't, creates another artificial land scarcity. And it's not a national issue. It's an international issue in a lot of different ways. And in my paper, I discuss it as kind of a, some sort of, the Greens and the left often have this sort of outlook towards things are just running out, while they think, spare land is running out when the government owns, I don't know what percentage of acreage, and if you count up state, federal, and local acreage in the entire United States, it's very high. I think anyone back me up that it's at least over 50%. It's got to at some point. And one deal that came across to try to, how do you look at this? Well, there was a deal a couple months back. It caused a ruckus in some property rights circles. Our now Secretary of the Treasury, Hank Paulson, when he was at Goldman Sachs, he's a big into the bird scene, and he's a New York type person and big banker. Anyways, he was involved in a land deal with the Wildlife Conservation Society, in which Goldman Sachs was in possession of a large tract of land in southern Patagonia in Chile. And we were having this tough trying to decide between whether or not just preservation, and it's private. This is private to private. However, the problem is, number one, it's in a foreign country. Number two, why, should that be up to us and not the Chileans to decide for themselves? And number three, how much more private property is going to go off of the market and off of the tax rolls, no matter where you're talking about? And number four is, why are all these wealthy Americans from California and also cities involved in basically changing the landscape of other countries in a manner of, their use of it? I mean, there's, trying to think of Doug Tompkins, who runs the Deep Ecology Foundation, has a tract of land in Chile as well that basically cuts the country in half in a certain spot where, even if the Chilean government wanted to put a road through, right now they couldn't. And he's picked fights with the nationalists and the salmon farmers, who are a big constituency in that part of the country, because they, that provides a lot of jobs, and it's good work. But my point is that at what point does preservation become, economically detrimental and affects other folks in a way that are basically unintended consequences? And it does. And I was also asked to talk a little bit about, who could be some of the heroes, who could come out with us and care about some of these issues. And the only thing I could think of pretty strongly was, the Kalo decision and the fallout from it sparked a lot of interest in property rights that hadn't existed since, and probably for years. And, if you can find those kind of people to motivate and to continue being involved and say, look, these issues aren't going to go away just when you pass a protection bill in your state. I mean, there's going to be other issues. There's going to be local issues, and you should, stay on top of it. I mean, if you're concerned enough now, stay concerned, stay involved, stay in touch. But with that, I'm just going to open it up to questions. If anyone has any questions for me about the foundation specifically and some of the groups and their funding structures.